Hey, here we are, week 14 of the fantasy football season. Let's talk some starts and sits for the running back position. What is going on, everybody? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Welcome to week 14. Wow, it's gone fast, of the fantasy football season. Today we're talking about running back starts and sits. Going to be going through all the matchups once again, breaking them down. Timestamps are in the description. Don't forget that. I get people every week, hey, can't you just tell us who's coming or put pictures up? The timestamps are down in the description. Trying to help you guys out a little bit there. I know the videos can get a little bit longer, but I'm going to try to rapid fire through all these matchups, touch on almost every running back in every game, trying to help you guys make these crucial decisions here for your fantasy playoffs. Hey, even if you didn't make the playoffs, maybe you're just in the consolation bracket, go out there, keep competing. You don't want to finish last. I mean, some of these leagues have some horrible, things. If you finish last, you got to get tattoos or... it's bad. I've seen all kinds of things here the past couple years. So make sure you stay competitive here all the way through. We're going to be here all the way through week 17, so don't leave just yet. Here we go, though. Week 14 running back starts and sits. First game we got Jacksonville at Tennessee. Yeah, not going to be a real exciting Thursday night game if I had to guess. We go from offensive explosions on Thursday nights to Jacksonville, Tennessee. Anyway, starting off with Jacksonville, looks like Leonard Fournette's back. He served his one-game suspension. He should be good to go. If Leonard Fournette is healthy, which he is, and he starts, which he is, he must be in your lineup just for his touchdown upside alone. He hasn't been overly efficient on the ground. He does have that huge touchdown upside, though. He's had 18 carries for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. That was 2 weeks ago against Buffalo, the game in which he got suspended. Could have been a huge game had he actually stayed in the ball game in all 4 quarters. But like I said, as long as he's healthy, as long as he's starting, Leonard Fournette is somebody who needs to be in your lineup just based off of the touchdown upside alone. For Tennessee, you got Dion Lewis and Derrick Henry. Now, personally, if I'm in the fantasy playoffs, I'd rather be kicked in the man junk with steel-toed boots than start Dion Lewis or Derrick Henry. To me, it's just not worth the risk. They've had decent games. Derrick Henry went on a little bit of a touchdown streak there for a few weeks. It's completely almost disappeared. He's back to his normal 10 for 40 style running. Dion Lewis, who had PPR value earlier in the year, he's not doing anything. This is just not something in a week like this, whether you're in the playoffs or however it works out, you really don't feel good about starting Dion Lewis or Derrick Henry. Personally, I wouldn't own them, much less start them. Really depends on your league size, though. But if it were me, I'm avoiding this backfield altogether, just way too inconsistent. All right, moving on to the next set of offensive juggernauts. We got the Jets and the Bills. Yeah, I'm not really excited to watch it either. But for the Jets, we'll talk about Isaiah Crowell. Really no need to talk about Elijah McGuire because he's really not doing anything. Last week, Isaiah Crowell, 21 carries, 98 yards, and that was against a difficult Tennessee run defense. Not a horrible game. But we've seen it from Crowell before. Just because he had a decent game here. What happened 2 weeks ago when he played New England? 6 carries for 30. What about 4 weeks ago, the last time he played Buffalo? 7 carries for 19. It's just way too inconsistent. That offense is borderline disgusting. Not a horrible matchup. Buffalo's giving up on average 25 points per game to opposing running backs. But personally, in a week like this, Isaiah Crowell would not be in my lineup. For Buffalo, we got Shady McCoy, and I guess I could be naming Josh Allen as their starting running back. He's producing more rushing yards than Shady McCoy is. I actually liked Shady last week a little bit. Going up against Miami, I expected a little bit more. 15 carries for 52 yards. Not a whole lot going on there. But it's mostly because Josh Allen is doing everything. He's either scrambling the ball himself or throwing the ball downfield. LaShawn McCoy, even though he had 15 carries, isn't overly involved in this offense like you would expect him to be, being that he's probably the best offensive player on the roster. He's just has his upside limited by Josh Allen going forward. Now they get the New York Jets, which isn't a bad defense, giving up on average 23 points per game to opposing running backs. However, I expect a lot of those points to go towards Josh Allen, not so much Shady McCoy. He's a flex play at best. He has a high ceiling. He's just too inconsistent to throw into your RB1, RB2 slot on a weekly basis. Giants and Redskins are next. For the Giants, we have Saquon Barkley, who's basically a must-start every single week. Dude's been killing it lately. 3 straight weeks over 100 rushing yards. He's got a total of 5 touchdowns in his last 3 games. He's getting a ton of volume. basically running till his legs fall off. The only issue, somewhat of a tough matchup, I guess you could say. The last time he faced Washington was week 8, only 13 carries for 38 yards. However, he did add in another 9 receptions for 73 in that game, and I expect a little bit closer to the same this week. Maybe a little bit more production in the running game. The Washington Redskins are allowing 22.7 points per game to opposing running backs, including the last 2 weeks. They've given up over 125 yards and a touchdown when they've played Philadelphia and Dallas. Definitely a team you could run on here recently. And Saquon Barkley, don't need to sell him to you. He should probably be in your lineup. All right, for the Redskins, we have old man Adrian Peterson. Now, this could be a record. I probably should have checked it before I hit the record button, but I just now remembered it. He had 9 carries for 98 yards and a touchdown. Sounds great. Looks great on paper. The issue is 1 carry for 90 yards and a touchdown happened, which means he only had 8 carries for 8 yards the remainder of the game. That's no bueno. Partially because now there's no more Colt McCoy, the Sanchez. Mark Sanchez is back under center in the NFL for the Washington Redskins. And I have a feeling the defense is just going to start keying in on the run. They're going to take away Adrian Peterson and make Mark Sanchez beat them with limited weapons on the outside. I wouldn't blame them if they did that again. And now it is a decent matchup, though. What do we do with Adrian Peterson? The Giants are giving up on average 28 points per game. They didn't allow anything last week to Chicago as a running back. I mean, Tariq Cohen went absolutely crazy. Maybe we see a little bit more Chris Thompson this week for the Washington Redskins. Wasn't overly involved here, but that was his first game back this past week. Only had 3 carries for 3 yards, added in 3 receptions for 18. I can expect them to work him back in slowly, but he may have a little bit higher of an upside than Adrian Peterson. Peterson is solely touchdown dependent. Even though it is a decent matchup, I would feel more comfortable not, risking it with Adrian Peterson this week. Like I said, I expect the defenses to key in on the run and try to limit his upside because, let's be realistic, it's Mark Sanchez, butt fumble guy. I mean, yeah, I think the defenses would rather take their chances with him than Adrian Peterson at this point. Saints and Bucks are next, and this one could get pretty high scoring pretty quickly. We may see both quarterbacks go over 50 pass attempts in this game. Entirely possible. But we're going to start off with the Saints because they've been a headache for a lot of fantasy owners lately, especially Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. What do we do with them? If you have Kamara, you're kind of just rolling with it, right? You're not overly excited about his production as of late, but you don't have a choice. You can't bench Alvin Kamara. The ceiling is just too high, and whoever you would put in for him is probably just as much of a risk anyway. Alvin Kamara stays in the lineup. Mark Ingram is usually the question mark every single week, and he hasn't done a whole lot lately. Last week against Dallas, 7 carries for 27 yards. The week before that, against Atlanta, 11 for 52. Now this is a better matchup going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we just saw Christian McCaffrey go crazy against them last week. In fact, they gave up 160 yards rushing on 10 carries, did the Bucs last week to the Carolina Panthers, for 32 fantasy points. They got killed through the air also. I actually like Mark Ingram again this week. I know it's been hard to trust him off and on, but it's a decent matchup, and they really, really need to establish this running game to open up the passing game once again for Drew Brees. If that can happen, Michael Thomas becomes more effective, Ben Watson can get involved, Traquan Smith can get more involved. They need the running game to open up. They need more production out of these guys. I can see them forcing them the ball early in this game, trying to establish it early to try to set things up for the second half. Love the opportunity. Alvin Kamara's in the lineup. Mark Ingram, he's somebody that I would risk this week. All right, for the Bucs, we have Peyton Barber, somebody who's been playing better as of late, right? Well, he's had 3 touchdowns in his last 3 games, which have helped. The problem is he's not producing anything on the ground. Over his last 2 games, he's had 45 yards rushing this past week and then 47 yards the week before. He doesn't even have 100 yards over his last 2 games. The touchdowns are really saving him. And now he gets to go up against the 3rd-ranked run defense and the New Orleans Saints, giving up on average 18 points per game to fantasy running backs. Haven't allowed a rushing touchdown since week 11. Not something I want to risk with Peyton Barber this week. I expect the Tampa Bay Bucs to air it out all game long. Look for more Chris Godwin, Adam Humphries, Mike Evans, and a ton of pass attempts for Jameis Winston. Not so much Peyton Barber this week. Patriots and Dolphins are next, and definitely like this matchup better for the Patriots this week. James White and Sony Michel is who we're going to talk about. James White seemed to kind of regain his usage in the passing game, which was great to see. Only had 6 carries for 26 yards, which was about normal, but added in the 7 receptions for 92 yards. That's what we really need from James White going forward, and I could see it a little bit going forward in this game against Miami. This is a game that I expect New England to come out and get out on top early, and if that happens, that could limit some of the upside of James White. Sony Michel is going to be one of my starts of the week. I love the potential for Sony Michel this week going up against Miami. The last time he faced them, 25 carries, 112 yards, and a touchdown was kind of his breakout game of the year. It's definitely a great matchup. The Miami Dolphins are the 26th ranked defense against opposing running backs, giving up on average 27 points per game. They haven't allowed a rushing touchdown since week 10, which is a positive. They've been playing a little bit better as of late. Can't stop this offense on both sides, either throwing or running in New England. Sony Michel is going to get the volume. Really like his potential here for this week. Both him and James White are solid starts, in my opinion, for week 14. All right, for the Dolphins, you have Kenyon Drake and Frank Gore, neither of who you're too excited to put into your fantasy lineup, especially if you're in the playoffs. But I actually don't mind Kenyon Drake as much this week. It's really going to be reliant on his involvement in the passing game. But going up against the New England Patriots, they could be forced to throw the ball late into the game, and that could really boost the efficiency of a Kenyon Drake. He's still not getting a lot of touches on the ground. Only 7 carries for 31 yards this past week against Buffalo. Added in 2 receptions for 13 yards, but he did get a touchdown there through the air. He's had now touchdowns in 2 straight weeks, 3 total over those last 2 games. He's a decent running back. I don't know why they don't use him more. I really don't understand it. Frank Gore is still going to eat up the bulk of the carries on the ground. However, last week against Buffalo, he only had 8 carries for 21 yards. Wasn't a whole lot to do on the ground last week for the Miami Dolphins. Somewhat of a difficult matchup, too. The Patriots are the 12th ranked defense against opposing running backs. Haven't allowed a rushing touchdown since week 10, giving up on average 22 points a game. Over their last 5 games, they've only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns. Definitely a defense that's been more improved here second half of the season. I'm worried more about Frank Gore. I don't think you'd really start him much anyway. Kenyon Drake has some sneaky upside in a PPR league, possibly as a flex play, because the Dolphins could have to throw all 4 quarters to stay in the game with the Patriots. Baltimore and Kansas City are next, and for a little bit of a curveball, I'm going to make Gus Edwards one of my sits of the week. Now, he's coming off a game which he had 21 carries for 82 yards, no touchdowns. He's averaged over 20 touches a game his past 3 games. Why would I sit him? Well, he was dealing with ankle injuries last week. Came into the game, didn't look too limited, put up decent numbers. I mean, it's not great numbers. No touchdown, and that really hurts his upside because he's not involved in the passing game at all. Well, now he's dealing with the same ankle injuries this week, which will limit him in practice. And they're going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, which I know a lot of you guys are going to look at on paper and say that's a great matchup. The Chiefs are giving up on average over 30 points a game to opposing running backs. This is they're the 31st ranked defense. Of course I want to start Gus Edwards. But let's be careful. The Kansas City Chiefs can score points on anyone at any time, and they can do it very quickly. If that's the case, they're going to have to throw the ball more in Baltimore. I could see more Ty Montgomery upside than I can see Gus Edwards upside. Gus may get the bulk of the work in the first quarter, but if they fall behind in this game, Ty Montgomery will be the back that they use. And don't forget about Kenneth Dixon. He's all of a sudden in the mix a little bit also. That could also limit the upside of Gus Edwards. I'm worried about him this week. He may still see the volume, but if he doesn't get the touchdown, you're going to be highly disappointed in one Gus Edwards. All right, for the Chiefs, we'll talk about Spencer Ware because that's who everybody was so excited about last week when Spencer Ware then decided to go out and have 14 carries for 47 yards and a touchdown. Not a whole lot. Now, Spencer Ware was one of those plays last week that I kind of explained to a lot of people was really roster dependent. I didn't think he had this automatic must-start status last week. He did have high potential going up against the Oakland Raiders, but as that week went on, you could kind of tell that they weren't going to just solely rely on him. He may not be up to speed 100%, and it kind of tempered my expectations a little bit. I think I actually told a lot of people to stay away from Spencer Ware there towards the later half of the week, really depending on the other options that you had to choose from, because he had that high upside. And if it wasn't for that touchdown, we'd be more disappointed than we already are. But with all that being said, the Chiefs now just signed Charkandrick West. They have C.J. Anderson on deck if needed. This is going to be a committee going forward in Kansas City. Spencer Ware, Damian Williams, and Charkandrick West are all going to be involved in this offense, and it's really going to limit the upside of all of them. They even mentioned it pregame. One of the sideline reporters mentioned that the coaching staff of the Chiefs had said, hey, yeah, we're kind of going to go to more of a committee going forward. None of these guys are Kareem Hunt. And I think a lot of people kind of failed to remember that even though Kareem Hunt leaves and Spencer Ware takes that exact same role, doesn't mean that the production automatically comes with it. We definitely need to temper our expectations going forward on this backfield. If they go to a full-blown committee, which we may see this week, this could be the last time we ever use the Kansas City backfield for this season. I'm really not too excited to throw somebody out there, have them get 8, 9, 10 carries, not efficient, no touchdowns, and have it really ruin the fantasy season this late for me, especially if you're in a playoff run. Spencer Ware is going to be one of my sits of the week. Damian Williams and Charcandrick West don't have enough standalone value to be starts on their own. This is just going to be an ugly situation going forward for all of our fantasy owners and what could be a very productive Kansas City backfield. Colts and Texans are next. For the Colts, we have Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines, who we'll talk about, neither of who I have really high expectations for this week. Marlon Mack struggled last week, which we kind of expected against the Jacksonville run D. Only had 8 carries for 27 yards. Nyheim Hines was more productive last week, 4 carries for only 5 yards, but was more involved in the passing game. Had 9 receptions for 50 yards last week, and that's kind of what I see again this week. In my opinion, Nyheim Hines may have a slightly higher value here for Week 14, going up against the Houston Texans. Currently the 10th ranked team against opposing running backs, giving up on average 21 points per game. However, they haven't allowed more than 75 yards rushing on the ground to opposing running backs since Week 8, and that was against the Miami Dolphins. If you take that game away, they hadn't allowed over 78 yards to an opposing running back since Week 3. Definitely a solid run defense in Houston, not one which you really want to mess with in a critical week. Marlon Mack he's a slight risk, in my opinion. He's somebody who maybe needs to be a flex at best with some upside. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable putting him in as my RB1 or RB2. It's just too much risk there this week. Nyheim Hines, with the volume that he sees in the passing game, could see a similar stat line this week. So his ceiling may not be overly high, but he may be a slightly safer play, especially in PPR leagues. Not a bad start as a flex play either. Just got to be careful because this Houston defense can shut running backs out and not even bat an eye. All right, for the Texans, we have Lamar Miller, who apparently likes to play running back again in the NFL because 4 out of his last 6 games, he's gone for over 100 yards. Last week against the Cleveland Browns, 19 carries, 103 yards on the ground, no touchdowns, and he doesn't have that overly high involvement in the passing game. But he's getting the volume right now. I mean, it's something where we can't really ignore it. He's been getting close to 20 touches a week. It is a decent matchup going up against the 19th ranked defense of the Indianapolis Colts, giving up on average 24.7 points per game to opposing running backs. Last week against Jacksonville, can't really take those numbers into account. There was no Leonard Fournette. What would it have been had Leonard Fournette been there? Well, look back at Week 10. They allowed 39 fantasy points to the Jacksonville running backs. This is definitely a team that can give up points to opposing running backs. And Lamar Miller, as much as I didn't like him to begin the season, he's starting to progress to the point to where he's a solid start every single week. The benefit of that, more than likely, you haven't been overly reliant on Lamar Miller throughout the season. He could be just your flex play, and as a flex play in a decent matchup, he has some high value for Week 14. Atlanta and Green Bay are next. For the Falcons, we have Tevin Coleman and Ito Smith. Yeah, no thank you. Want nothing to do with this. Tevin Coleman isn't just not efficient. He is just the complete opposite of productive. I mean, the guy has been horrible lately. Last week, tough matchup against Baltimore. I get it. 6 carries for 8 yards, which don't get me wrong. The week before that, he had 8 carries for 6 yards. The week before that, only 8 carries. He likes the number 8, apparently. And I'm not willing to risk it against Green Bay. They are the 14th ranked defense against opposing running backs, giving up on average almost 23 points a game. They've given up 3 rushing touchdowns in their last 3 games combined. It's not a bad matchup for Tevin Coleman. It's a bad year for Tevin Coleman, and I want nothing to do with it. They're going to be more utilized in the passing game. The wide receivers are. Tevin Coleman's really not being involved in the passing game. 1 reception for 3 yards last week. I mean, this is something where this guy was one of their top slot receivers last year. Calvin Ridley has basically taken away all the passing upside of Tevin Coleman and really made him to the point where he's not usable anymore. Not only is he not a start for me this week, he's borderline droppable. If, there's a better option on the waiver wire, I want nothing to do with Tevin Coleman or Ito Smith, especially if I'm in the fantasy playoffs. Now, on the other side for the Green Bay Packers, we have Aaron Jones, who I definitely like Aaron Jones going forward, especially now there's no Mike McCarthy. Now, yes, interim coach Joe Philbin's not going to come in there and just set the world on fire, but at least he hopefully frees Aaron Jones to the point to where this kid can go out there and get you close to 18 to 25 touches a week. Last week against the Arizona Cardinals, 11 carries for 36 yards? What? That doesn't make any sense. The guy is he's the best playmaker in the backfield and still splitting carries with Jamal Williams. Probably one of the reasons why Mike McCarthy doesn't have a job. That, and they just lost to the Arizona Cardinals. Not a good season for the Green Bay Packers. I expect a heavy dose of Aaron Jones going forward. If nothing else, just to, quiet the fans a little bit. This has been a gripe of people all year long since he's come back from suspension. Why does he not get the bulk of the touches? I expect big things from Aaron Jones end of season, and he's got a great matchup going up against the Atlanta Falcons, the 29th ranked run defense, giving up on average almost 30 points per game. Now, they haven't allowed a rushing touchdown the last 2 games against Baltimore and New Orleans. That's something to keep in mind. They are playing improved defense the last couple weeks. However, Aaron Jones has looked explosive against all different types of opponents. Love him this week. He's definitely somebody who I would have in my lineup. Panthers and Browns are next. For the Panthers, we have Christian McCaffrey, who is now the number 3 running back in all of fantasy football and PPR leagues. The guy is absolutely crazy. Last week against the Tampa Bay Bucks, only had 10 carries, turned it into 106 yards, then had 9 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown. The guy is playing out of his mind 100%. If you own Christian McCaffrey, go ahead and put him in your lineup, hit the submit button, and then lock the computer, because don't touch it. I don't care who the matchup is going forward. They have a difficult matchup coming up in Week 15, but it's not going to matter. Christian McCaffrey needs to be in a lineup if he's owned in whatever league that he's in. For the Browns, we got Nick Chubb, and if you've watched this show for any amount of time, you know that I like the Chubb, and I do again. I was a little bit disappointed last week when I saw he only had 9 carries for 31 yards. However, had another touchdown on the ground. That now gives him 5 touchdowns in his last 6 games ever since Carlos Hyde left. Plus, he's averaging right around 3 receptions a game. This past week, 3 catches, 41 yards. No touchdown this week through the air, but he's somebody who's been very, very productive as of late. Now, this is a difficult matchup. The Panthers are giving up 18 points per game to opposing running backs, good enough for 4th in the league. They have allowed, however, 1 rushing touchdown 4 straight weeks. So I do like the upside of Nick Chubb still. Based on the volume that he sees, he's still almost a must-start for me every single week, just based off of that volume. Those 20-plus carries with this high touchdown upside make him a borderline must-start every single week, regardless of the opponent. Being that it is a difficult matchup, though, just temper expectations a little bit. Even though he still has a very high floor, his ceiling could be a little bit lower this week. Broncos and Niners are next. For the Broncos, we have Phillip Lindsay. And he's coming off his best game of the year, which is crazy because this guy's been playing great all year long. He's up to running back 10 in PPR leagues. Crazy production the past few weeks. He's got 5 rushing touchdowns in his last 3 games alone. This past week, his best game of the season. 19 carries, 157 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Kind of shredded that label of not just a pass-catching back, not just a satellite back. This guy is a legit 3-down back right now for the Denver Broncos, and he's putting up huge numbers. Now he gets the San Francisco 49ers, the 17th ranked defense against opposing running backs, giving up on average 24 points per game to those opposing running backs. They have 2 straight weeks of giving up a rushing touchdown on the ground, including last week against Seattle. The running backs of Seattle combined for 144 yards rushing and a touchdown on the ground. Definitely a great matchup. Great start for Phillip Lindsay. At this point, as crazy it is to think about, he's must start every single week. All right, for the 49ers, I guess we'll talk about Jeff Wilson Jr. And no, I don't mean the guy who's going to file your taxes for you this year. Jeff Wilson Jr. is apparently the starting running back in San Francisco. Now, up until game time last week, we all thought Matt Breida was going to have a decent game, had a decent matchup. We were pretty excited for it. Injured himself in pregame warmups. Didn't come out in time for all the fantasy players to make an adjustment. Breida still played, re-aggravated the injury, and has left. He's already been ruled out for Week 14, and now Jeff Wilson Jr. Yep, nobody really knows who he is. However, this past week, 15 carries, 61 yards on the ground, added in another 8 receptions for 73. He's somebody who will be relied upon in this offense now, has a solid upside. Am I going to rush out to the waiver wire and grab him and start him? Probably not, even though Denver isn't a bad matchup, 20th against opposing running backs, giving up on average 25 points per game. However, they haven't allowed a rushing touchdown on the ground to an opposing running back since Week 6. Not something where I'm looking forward to starting Jeff Wilson Jr., but if you're in a deep league, like a 16-team leagues, and you're looking for a flex play, not a bad option. You know he should at least get the volume this week. Bengals and Chargers are next. For the Bengals, you got Joe Mixon, and unfortunately, you're starting to get a little bit more Gio Bernard than you would like if you're a Joe Mixon owner. Last week, Mixon, 12 carries, 82 yards, still being highly, highly efficient on the ground. It's really saving a lot of fantasy days because he hasn't had more than 14 carries in a game since week 8. And now that Gio Bernard is eating into the passing game a little bit, it's kind of limiting the upside of Joe Mixon, which is getting very irritating. It's a decent matchup this week. The 18th ranked defense of the Los Angeles Chargers, giving up on average 24 points per game. Last week against Pittsburgh, we saw what James Conner did. Well, kind of. They were pretty much just goal line carries. But however, they gave up 2 touchdowns. They've given up 5 rushing touchdowns in their last 3 games. Still a decent matchup. Like I said, Joe Mixon, his ceiling may be slightly limited now because Gio Bernard is back in the mix. And Marvin Lewis isn't going to go away from Gio Bernard no matter how much we ask him to or want him to. Mixon is still a safe play. He's a very safe floor play. His ceiling's just going to be limited as long as Gio Bernard's in uniform. Regardless of the matchup, Mixon is an elite talent. He just needs the workload. If this kid could get anywhere between 20 and 25 touches a game, he'd be a hands-down running back 1. All right, for the Chargers, we have Austin Eckler and Justin Jackson. Now, we expected a little bit more out of Austin Eckler last week, and we didn't really get it. He had the bulk of the work, 13 carries, but only had 21 yards on the ground, another 5 receptions for 22. Justin Jackson was the running back who was really overly efficient with the touches he got. Only 8 carries. Turned him into 63 yards and a touchdown, and I can really see the Chargers going forward turning to Justin Jackson on early downs and kind of leaving Austin Eckler in that role that he played with Melvin Gordon. Now, I'm not saying that Justin Jackson is Melvin Gordon, but he is a better runner between the tackles. He's more explosive, not quite as fast as Eckler, but he's more shifty. He can change direction quick. He's got some crazy head fake moves. I mean, he's out there like he's crossing somebody over, but the guy is efficient with his touches, doesn't need a huge amount of touches to have a decent game, not somebody who's just going to run into the back of his offensive lineman and fall down. I like both of these guys this week, and I know that sounds crazy because it would be really hard to start Justin Jackson in week 14. But if Eckler can stay in his same role, Justin Jackson can get the bulk of the early down work. You're kind of looking at an opportunity against one of the worst run defenses in football. They're going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, who have given up 7 rushing touchdowns in their last 4 games. They've given up at least 1 rushing touchdown every single week since week 3. This is definitely a defense that you can run on and run on them a lot. It's a great matchup. I can see a lot of Justin Jackson and Austin Eckler early, and then maybe some Justin Jackson all second half to kind of close out the game. Great potential. It's a risk. It's bold, but I like it for week 14. Detroit, Arizona is next. This is a great matchup for the running backs of the Detroit Lions. Right now, the Arizona Cardinals are the 29th ranked team against opposing running backs, giving up on average almost 30 points per game, 4 rushing touchdowns over their last 2 weeks. The problem is, still don't know about Kerryon Johnson and whether he comes back. As of right now, it's not looking like it, but there is still a possibility. Theo Riddick, somebody who I expect to be more involved in the passing game, has been, but has kind of a really low ceiling. Averaging right around 10 points his past couple games. Not somebody who you're counting on to bring you to a victory week in and week out. More of a decent flex play in PPR leagues if there's no better options. LeGarrette Blount hasn't been overly efficient. 16 carries, 61 yards, no touchdowns this past week against the Rams. However, if Kerryon Johnson sits out this week, I do like the upside of LeGarrette Blount with an easy matchup. We really just need to pay attention to the practice reports and injury reports. Let's find out what's happening with Kerryon Johnson before we think about starting LeGarrette Blount. For the Cardinals, you have David Johnson. And he's been very, very frustrating here the past couple weeks. Just wasn't seeing the volume we wanted him to see. And then he gets 20 carries against the Packers, only turns it into 69 yards. The issue with this is only 1 reception, and Chase Edmonds actually had 2 of the touchdowns, one of them from the goal line. Only 5 carries for 53 yards, but had those 2 touchdowns and really limited David Johnson in this past game. Do I want to say that this is just dumb luck? Yeah, kind of. However, there's been a lot of dumb luck this year with David Johnson. He's been very frustrating to own. He still is the number 12 running back in all PPR leagues, but these past 2 weeks have really cost a lot of people. It is a decent matchup, 24th ranked defense of the Detroit Lions. They gave up 2 touchdowns last week to the Los Angeles Rams and 140 rushing yards. Definitely a defense that you can run on. David Johnson has a decent matchup. He should be in your lineup, but I understand that you're not overly excited about putting him in there. Let's just hope that this offense can kind of catapult off this win against the Green Bay Packers and try to make something of their season, starting with David Johnson. Pittsburgh and Oakland are next, and for the Steelers, I guess we're talking about Jalen Samuels because it's official now. James Conner will not play in Week 14. Jalen Samuels will be the #1 pickup off the waiver wire. If you're lucky enough to get him, he'll have a matchup against the 22nd ranked defense of the Oakland Raiders. Definitely a great start for him, and if you're in a Yahoo league, you can actually put him as your tight end, which is a huge benefit. Yes, if you own Jalen Samuels, to me, he's borderline must start this week now because he's going to have a huge workload until James Conner can come back. For the Raiders, we have Doug Martin and Jalen Richard. Doug Martin is really still doing Doug Martin type of things, not a whole lot. Last week, 18 carries, 61 yards, did have another touchdown. That's 2 straight games with a touchdown. Jalen Richard was more explosive on the ground, only 6 carries, turned it into 95 yards, and then added in another 3 receptions for 31. It's a difficult defensive matchup for these guys, though. The Pittsburgh Steelers are the 7th-ranked defense against opposing running backs, giving up on average 19 points per game. They have, however, given up at least 1 rushing touchdown their last 5 straight weeks. But to me, I see more Jalen Richard than Doug Martin in this game. Doug Martin had a costly fumble. Jalen Richard started to pick up a little bit more of the slack there in the second half. Plus, this offense of the Pittsburgh Steelers could put up some huge first half points. And if that's the case, we see more Jalen Richard down the stretch in the passing game. If you're in a PPR league, Jalen Richard isn't a bad start as a flex play. Personally, though, Doug Martin, I wouldn't risk it, especially if you're in the fantasy playoffs with him. Eagles and Cowboys are next, and for the Eagles, we'll have Josh Adams. And I don't think I want anything to do with any of these running backs, honestly. This week, they're going up against the Dallas Cowboys, who are not only playing with confidence, they're one of the best defenses in football, giving up only 19 points to opposing running backs, good enough for 7th overall in the league, only giving up 1 rushing touchdown over their last 4 games. They're playing really well in Dallas. They haven't allowed over 100 yards to opposing running backs since Week 7. Week 7, here we are, Week 14, 7 weeks ago since they've allowed over 100 yards rushing. Am I real quick to run out there, get Josh Adams and put him in my lineup? Not really. Even though he has seen the volume the past couple weeks, this past week against Washington, 20 carries, 85 yards. No touchdowns, kind of limited the upside. I just really don't want anything to do with this Dallas defense this week. It could be one of those weeks where we don't see a whole lot from the run game of the Philadelphia Eagles. For the Cowboys, you got Ezekiel Elliott, somebody who you are very pleased with lately, which is a good thing because you were probably somewhat disappointed earlier in the season. However, he's all the way up to running back 6 now in PPR leagues. He's averaged over 25 points a game for his past 4 games, and it's somewhat of an easy, I don't want to call it an easy matchup, but a lighter matchup than this would have been earlier in the season. He gets the Philadelphia Eagles defense, who's decimated by injuries. They've given up 4 rushing touchdowns in their last 3 games alone. Definitely a team that is struggling on the defensive side of the football. We saw the big run by Adrian Peterson for 90 yards. That was pretty much all he got, but that's more due to the inefficiencies of the offense of the Redskins. I expect a lot more out of Ezekiel Elliott. He could have a huge day, and he's definitely somebody that if you're in the playoffs and he's on your roster, he could carry you to a championship all by himself. Rams and Bears are next. For the Rams, Todd Gurley, and yes, it's a difficult matchup going up against the Bears, but you don't ever sit Todd Gurley. Even if his upside is limited, what is it limited to? Maybe what we saw Week 11, where he had 11 fantasy points at worst, his worst game of the season? I'll take that in a tough matchup. His ceiling is just way too high to risk putting him on your bench for any possible reason. I don't care who the matchup is. For the Bears, we have Tariq Cohen, and I'll say Jordan Howard's name just to make him feel better, but I probably wouldn't start him. Tariq Cohen, on the other hand, will be one of my starts of the week. The kid is playing crazy good. This past week, only had 8 carries for 30 yards, which we don't expect a whole lot from. Added in 12 receptions for 156 yards. 36 fantasy points in PPR leagues. He is playing great this season, all the way up to running back 11, like I said. Now they get the Los Angeles Rams, and if we can know one thing about the Rams, they're one of the best offenses in football that can put up points on anybody at any given time, regardless of the defense. It's easier to throw on Chicago than it is to run on Chicago, so I expect it to be aired out by the Rams almost for all 4 quarters again. And Tariq Cohen is somebody who could be heavily involved in the passing game once again this week. Super high upside. Love Tariq Cohen. Love the matchup against the Rams and his ability to be involved in the passing game. To me, Jordan Howard, 100% strictly touchdown dependent. And if he doesn't get that touchdown, you're sorely disappointed. He hasn't reached double-digit fantasy points since week 9. No thanks passing on Jordan Howard, but sign me up for some Tariq Cohen. Vikings and Seahawks, and for the Vikings, we got Dalvin Cook, who for the first time I can say is going to be one of my starts of the week. Love Dalvin Cook in the preseason. Really expected a big year from him, and then he just couldn't get healthy. Well, he's finally starting to get healthy. He now has double-digit fantasy points 3 out of his last 4 games, and he's really not getting the bulk of the volume yet. He's being highly efficient with what he's getting. This past week against the Patriots, only had 9 carries. However, turned it into 84 rushing yards and then added in 8 receptions for 22. That's gold in PPR leagues. If you own Dalvin Cook in a decent matchup against the 23rd ranked defense of the Seattle Seahawks, giving up on average 26 points per game to opposing running backs, they've given up 4 rushing touchdowns in their last 5 weeks. Love the explosiveness of Dalvin Cook. He looks healthy. He looks explosive. He just needs more work, and I can see them slowly trying to give him more as the season progresses, getting him ready for a playoff push. Dalvin Cook is somebody who I really like this week. He's going to be one of my starts of the week, and please don't let me down, Dalvin, because I've waited 14 weeks to put you right here. All right, for the Seahawks, we have Chris Carson, who I'm not high on this week at all. Now, yes, he's nursing a dislocated finger. He should be able to play still, but that's not the reason why I don't like Chris Carson. B, it's a tough matchup against one of the best run defenses in football. The Minnesota Vikings give up on average 21 points per game. However, they have given up 3 rushing touchdowns the past 2 weeks. More so, though, it's Rashad Penny. I see more Rashad Penny down the stretch. They need to see what they have in their first-round pick. What can they get out of him? Is he the future backfield in Seattle? They invested a lot on him, and he's starting to produce with the numbers he's been given. He's not getting a ton of touches, but what he's getting him, he's doing something with it, and he looks great. 7 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown this past week, and I can see a little bit more Rashad Penny every single week, taking away that upside, taking away that volume that made Chris Carson a solid start from week to week. Now, with that going away, the injury, the matchup, staying away from Chris Carson here in week 14. All right, those were all the matchups for all the running backs this week. Hopefully that was able to help you set your lineup. Make sure you guys are staying tuned, though. We have our live show coming Saturday afternoon, once again, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. Lots of fun, lots of interaction. Love talking with you guys. Looking forward to it again. And then make sure you check out a video I'm releasing here. It's about the channel. It's about what are you guys looking for in 2019. Not going to go into a whole lot of detail about it, but make sure you go over to the channel, check that one out. I could really use some feedback for everybody who watches here. Really appreciate you. Hopefully you're having a great holiday season. We'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.